Today is December 13, 2015, and we've just entered into a new moon, and we're still in Hanukkah. And tonight we will be continuing on studying the history of this important period between the days of Nehemiah and the days of Jesus through the writings of Josephus. But before that, let us pray. Heavenly Family, thank you so much for loving us and for revealing to us the principles of truth. There is so much that we still have to learn. And I, for one, am so grateful that we're here at another new moon in which we are sure you will be giving us fresh fruit from the tree of life. Mm-hmm. A fresh opportunity to receive your righteousness and to have things that perhaps we did not realize before shown to us to reveal the gospel in clarity. So please show us whatever it is that you want to show us. And thank you so much for it. And also tonight, as we continue to study this important history, please help us to see the principles. Thank you for bringing out important principles in our past studies. Help us to learn more principles tonight. Thank you so much. Father and Mother, we ask these things in the name of your Son and daughter, Branch. Amen.
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 Okay, so I think everyone here already knows how to get to the reading or the translation of what we're going to be reading here, Antiquities of the Jews, on the Early Jewish Writings website. But in case anyone here doesn't remember where exactly we're at, we are in Antiquities, Book 12, Chapter 4. And the last thing that we were reading about was the Josephus was quoting some letters and a decree from King Antiochus, and basically how the Jews were being well treated by the Greeks under Antiochus the Great, or Antiochus the Third. Oh yeah, and the other thing that I will mention is that on the website, earlyjewishwritings.com, where it picks up in Chapter 4, there's actually a typo. After Chapter 3, instead of saying Chapter 4, it says Chapter 6. And then it goes Chapter 5 and then Chapter 6 again. But that's just a typo. It should say Chapter 4. The actual content under the heading Chapter 6 here is actually the content of Chapter 4. So it's not like anything is missing. But the heading is how Antiochus made a league with Ptolemy and how Onias provoked Ptolemy, Euergetes. How Onias provoked Ptolemy Euergetes to anger, and how Joseph brought all things right again and entered into friendship with him, and what other things were done by Joseph and his son Hyrcanus. So those are the different elements that are covered within this chapter. Before we get into this, though, as we did yesterday, and yesterday actually it was really good having a little bit of discussion before getting into the reading on this history in general. And so I just wanted to ask if anyone had any comments or questions before we get into the reading itself.
I got a short comment. Just not on this subject here, but it's how order is heaven's first law, and how orderly the calendar, God's calendar is. You know, the days end at sunset, the months end at the first sliver of the new moon after the waxing and waning. And it's so nice compared to the man system.
Yeah, it's in harmony with nature. It's wonderful. All right, any other comments before we get back into Antiquities? And if not, would someone like to volunteer to read?
Well, I could read some. I just need to know where to start.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so, and I'm assuming you're using the Early Jewish Writings website?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, early Jewish, yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're in Book 12 and Chapter 4, but there's a typo on that web page. It says Chapter 6 when it's supposed to be Chapter 4.
So just the next chapter after 3.
Yeah, you'll see it after 3, then you can scroll down, and it will say Chapter 6.
How Antiochus made a league with Ptolemy?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
Oh, and do please read that whole title there before the first paragraph. Thanks.
No problem, Teresa. How Antiochus made a league with Ptolemy, and how Onias provoked Ptolemy Euergetes to anger, and how Joseph brought all things right again and entered into friendship with him, and what other things were done by Joseph and his son Hyrcanus. After this, Antiochus made a friendship and league with Ptolemy, and gave him his daughter Cleopatra to wife, and yielded up to him Celesyria and Samaria and Judea and Phoenicia by way of dowry. And upon the division of the taxes between the two kings, all the principal men framed the taxes of their several countries, and collecting the sum that was settled for them, paid the same to the two kings. Now at this time the Samaritans were in a flourishing condition, and much distressed the Jews, cutting off parts of their land and carrying off slaves. This happened when Onias was high priest, for after Eleazar's death his uncle Manasseh took the priesthood, and after he had ended his life, Onias received the dignity. He was the son of Simon, who was called the Just, which Simon was the brother of Eleazar, as I said before. This Onias was one of a little soul, and a great lover of money, and for that reason, because he did not pay that tax of 20 talents of silver, which his forefathers paid to these things out of their own estates, he provoked King Ptolemy Euergetes to anger, who was the father of Philopater. Euergetes sent an ambassador to Jerusalem and complained that Onias did not pay his taxes, and threatened that if he did not receive them, he would seize upon their land and send soldiers to live upon it. When the Jews heard this message of the king, they were confounded. But so sordidly covetous was Onias that nothing of things nature made him ashamed.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this Onias. It refers to him as being the son of Simon the Just. So Simon the Just was the son of Onias the First. And after Simon the Just, there was Eleazar, also son of Onias the First, and then there was Manasseh. So this is Onias the Second, who it's talking about now, and he was in office from 240 BC to 218 BC. So this is giving us a little bit better of a time frame of when we're looking at here. Any other comments on this first paragraph?
I thought it was interesting that two kings were collecting taxes from the same people in the same land or something. I didn't really understand it.
Yeah, it looks like Antiochus, who I think earlier in the third chapter, I think it said that he was king of Asia Minor. and he made a friendship and a league with Ptolemy, who was ruling in Egypt. So this is basically before those in Asia Minor and those in Egypt, although they were both Greek rulers, basically were at odds with one another. And so you'd have people from the north taking over Jerusalem and people from the south taking over again, and so Jerusalem was always caught in battle. But then at this time, there was a league made, and I guess as part of the way they had things set up, they had a division of the taxes between the two kings.
Was that where Brother Hoddeth, he talked about the king of the north and the king of the south and showed all them maps of the king of the north and king of the south, how these things changed?
Right.
With Israel, I think.
Yeah, that does relate to this subject. And I'd have to look at the maps to see which specific parts he shows. But basically, in tracing Daniel 11, he shows how, there was the Ptolemaic dynasty was the first king of the south, and then he traces the whole history of taking over the promised land, and it definitely covers this period.
I think that's where it covers that Ptolemy became Rome or something too, or pagan papal Rome.
Well, he mentions that the origins of pagan Rome came from within one sector of the Greek world, basically. But the way that he puts it is that is an obscure part of history. It's something that there isn't much known about. So I'm not sure if there's been more historical information made available since his days. If there is, that would be great to find out more about the origins of Rome. I know that in the books of the Maccabees, I think it was the Romans, or maybe it was the Spartans. Spartans and the Hebrews.
Yeah, were related.
Yeah, were related. So that'd be something interesting to look at. But it's a point where Hoddeth mentions the origins of Rome coming through, and I do believe it was the southern portion of the Grecian Empire, but he states that it's a point of obscurity. So we'd have to look more into that. And if anyone here happens to know more about the origins of Rome, I would certainly be interested to hear it. All right, shall we continue on to the second paragraph? And would you like to keep reading, Tim, or do you want to pass that responsibility on to someone else?
I could keep reading. It's not a problem.
Okay, sure, thanks.
There was now one Joseph, young in age, but of great reputation among the people of Jerusalem, for gravity, prudence, and justice. His father's name was Tobias, and his mother was the sister of Onias the high priest, who informed him of the coming of the ambassador, for he was then sojourning at a village named Phicol, where he was born. Hereupon he came to the city, Jerusalem, and reproved Onias for not taking care of the preservation of his countrymen, but bringing the nation into dangers by not paying this money. For which preservation of them he told him he had received the authority over them, and had been made high priest, but that in case he was so great a lover of money as to endure to see his country in danger on that account, and his countrymen suffer the greatest damages. He advised him to go to the king and petition him to remit either the whole or a part of the sum demanded. Onias' answer was this, that he did not care for his authority, and that he was ready, if the thing were practical, to lay down his high priesthood, and that he would not go to the king, because he troubled not himself at all about such matters. Joseph then asked him if he would not give him leave to go ambassador on behalf of the nation. He replied that he would give him leave, upon which Joseph went up into the temple and called the multitude together to a congregation, and exhorted them not to be disturbed nor affrighted because of his uncle Onias' carelessness, but desired them to be at rest, and not terrify themselves with fear about it. For he promised them that he would be their ambassador to the king, and persuade him that they had done him no wrong. And when the multitude heard this, they returned thanks to Joseph. So he went down from the temple and treated Ptolemy's ambassador in a hospitable manner. He also presented him with rich gifts, and feasted him magnificently for many days, and then sent him to the king before him, and told him that he would soon follow him, for he was now more willing to go to the king by the encouragement of the ambassador, who earnestly persuaded him to come into Egypt, and promised him that he would take care that he should obtain everything that he desired of Ptolemy. For he was highly pleased with his frank and liberal temper, and with the gravity of his deportment.
Okay, any comments? All right. Do you want to continue on to the next paragraph?
You want to read that footnote? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
There's a footnote. Joseph was sojourning at a village named Phicol or whatever.
Yeah, okay. So this footnote says, the name of this place, Phicol, is the very same with that of the chief captain of Abimelech's host in the days of Abraham, Genesis 21:22, and might possibly be the place of that Phicol's nativity or abode, for it seems to have been in the south part of Palestine, as that was. Okay.
When Ptolemy's ambassador was come into Egypt, he told the king of the thoughtless temper of Onias, and informed him of the goodness of the disposition of Joseph, and that he was coming to him to excuse the multitude, as not having done him any harm, for that he was their patron. In short, he was so very large in his encomiums upon the young man that he disposed both the king and his wife Cleopatra to have a kindness for him before he came. So Joseph sent his friends at Samaria and borrowed money of them, and got ready what was necessary for his journey, garments and cups and beasts for burden, which amounted to about 20,000 drachmae, and went to Alexandria. Now it happened that at this time all the principal men and rulers went up out of the cities of Syria and Phoenicia to bid for their taxes. For every year the king sold them to the men of the greatest power in every city. So these men saw Joseph journeying on the way, and laughed at him for his poverty and meanness. But when he came to Alexandria and heard that King Ptolemy was at Memphis, he went up thither to meet with him, which happened as the king was sitting in his chariot with his wife and with his friend Athenion, who was the very person who had been ambassador at Jerusalem and had been entertained by Joseph. As soon, therefore, as Athenion saw him, he presently made him known to the king, how good and how generous a young man he was. So Ptolemy saluted him first, and desired him to come up into his chariot, and as Joseph sat there, he began to complain of the management of Onias, to which he answered, Forgive him on account of his age, for thou canst not certainly be unacquainted with this, that old men and infants have their minds exactly alike. But thou shalt have from us, who are young men, everything that thou desirest, and shalt have no cause to complain. With this good humor and pleasantry of the young man, the king was so delighted that he began already, as though he had long experience of him, to have a still greater affection for him, insomuch that he bade him take his diet in the king's palace and be a guest at his own table every day. But when the king was come to Alexandria, the principal men of Syria saw him sitting with the king, and were much offended at it.
Some humor there.
Yeah, certainly. And he is quite the, well, what would be the best term, I guess, quite the ambassador.
Right, yeah. Interesting. Any other comments?
Kind of reminds me of Joseph, of the other Joseph.
Yeah, interesting. It was kind of reminding me of that too. Young man and generous, and seems to be of a good persuasion. And of course, going down into Egypt.
And a good worker, where he became the number 2 man with the king.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, the king definitely likes this Joseph, doesn't he? Yeah, interesting. I want to know what happens next.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, are there any other comments before we continue on then? Okay. Yeah, you can continue on if you like, Tim.
All right, paragraph 4. And when the day came on which the king was to let the taxes of the cities to the farm, and those that were the principal men of dignity in their several countries were to bid for them the sum of the taxes together of Syria and Phoenicia and Judea with Samaria, as they were bidden for, came to 8,000 talents. Hereupon Joseph accused the bidders as having agreed together to estimate the value of the taxes at too low a rate, and he promised that he would himself give twice as much for them. But for those who did not pay, he would send the king home their whole substance, for this privilege was sold together with the taxes themselves. The king was pleased to hear that offer, and because it augmented his revenues, he said he would confirm the sale of the taxes to him. But when he asked him this question, whether he had any sureties that would be bound for the payment of the money, he answered very pleasantly, I will give such security, and those of persons good and responsible, in which you shall have no reason to distrust. And when he bid him name them who they were, he replied, I give thee no other persons, O king, for my sureties than thyself, and this thy wife, and you shall be security for both parties. So Ptolemy laughed at the proposal, and granted him the farming of the taxes without any sureties. This procedure was a sore grief to those that came from the cities into Egypt, who were utterly disappointed, and they returned everyone to their own country with shame.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Seems to have some wit.
Yeah, that's quite bold.
Very, very bold. Interesting. Yeah, any comments on this paragraph? Well, one thing that I wanted to actually mention from an earlier paragraph, I guess just when we got to the end of it, I wasn't thinking to comment on this, but I'm remembering now. It mentioned how Samaria was doing very well and was kind of taking over parts of the land of Judea, or however it put it, and how they were taking slaves from them. And it was just like, Yeah, that definitely is a important part of the history when we want to understand the relationship between Jews and Samaritans in New Testament times.
True.
This all kind of paints the picture of the things that they all knew and contributed to the tensions that were there.
Amen. I was reminded of, I think it was Joseph's father when he came into Egypt, and it was Ellen White said that when you're with God, or when you're God's people, you can talk to kings or anybody, you know, when the true God is your God.
Yeah, Ellen White also said of Christ about the manner in which he spoke, that he spoke in such a simple way that anyone, even the least educated, could understand him. But yet still the most educated and the most noble were charmed with things that he said.
Amen.
Interesting. Okay. Any other comments before moving on to the next paragraph? Okay.
Paragraph 5. But Joseph took with him 2,000 foot soldiers from the king, for he desired he might have some assistance, in order to force such as were refractory in the cities to pay, and borrowing of the king's friends at Alexandria 500 talents. He made haste back to Syria, and when he was at Ascalon and demanded the taxes of the people of Ascalon, they refused to pay anything and affronted him also, upon which he seized upon about 20 of the principal men and slew them, and gathered what they had together, and sent it all to the king, and informed him what he had done. Ptolemy admired the prudent conduct of the man, and commended him for what he had done, and gave him leave to do as he pleased. When the Syrians heard of this, they were astonished, and having before them a sad example in the men of Ascalon that were slain, they opened their gates and willingly admitted Joseph and paid their taxes. And when the inhabitants of Scythopolis attempted to affront him, and would not pay him those taxes which they formerly used to pay, without disputing about them, he slew also the principal men of that city, and sent their effects to the king. By this means he gathered great wealth together, and made vast gains by this farming of the taxes, and he made use of what estate he had thus gotten, in order to support his authority, as thinking it a piece of prudence to keep what had been the occasion and foundation of his present good fortune, and this he did by assistance of what he was already possessed of, for he privately sent many presents to the king, and to Cleopatra, and to their friends, and to all that were powerful about the court, and thereby purchased their goodwill to himself.
Well, it definitely seems as though he was seeking good relations with the Greeks, but I'm sure not all of his own nation were too happy about it, and of course the other nations. Any thoughts or comments on that?
Sound like he was a wise man.
He definitely knew how to get what he wanted and to be on good terms with those he wanted to be on good terms with.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Yeah. It almost seems pretty ruthless. I'm waiting to hear the whole story so I can try to understand why he's doing the things that he's doing, killing people.
To get taxes for a pagan nation.
Yeah.
But his thoughts towards his own nation were good. He didn't want them to suffer because of the selfishness of Onias.
It's true that he didn't want them to suffer for the selfishness of Onias, that's for sure. But it's, the extent to which he's going there of basically working for the king of, the southern kingdom of Greece, and even going at that length. He has troops there from the king and killing people for not paying taxes, and then, taking the money and all that.
Of his own initiative.
Yeah, of his own initiative. And, maybe, whether it was of his own initiative or not, it's still kind of out there. But doing it of his own initiative anyways it's kind of, you have to wonder about the mindset and the principles upon which he was operating.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see, as you said, how the story progresses and what he ends up doing, the decisions that he makes, and if he's shown to be corrupt from Josephus' point of view even.
Right. If he'd let them first people, that confronted him, not pay their taxes, he would have fell apart.
That's true. He would not have succeeded.
So I guess it depends on where you want to succeed, what kind of success you want, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's see what else. Because right now we don't have the whole story. Hard to know. I would have to see something pretty interesting or different to think that he was doing the right thing, but trying to keep an open mind.
All right, so any other comments before we continue then? All right, I guess we'll continue.
Paragraph 6. This good fortune he enjoyed for the 22 years and was become the father of 7 sons by one wife. He had also another son whose name was Hyrcanus by his brother Ptolemy Euergetes' daughter, whom he married on the following occasion. He once came to Alexandria with his brother, who had along with him a daughter already marriageable, in order to give her in wedlock to some of the Jews of chief dignity there. He then supped with the king, and falling in love with an actress that was of great beauty, and came into the room where they feasted. He told his brother of it, and entreated him, because a Jew is forbidden by their law to come near to a foreigner to conceal his offense, and to be kind and subservient to him, and to give him an opportunity of fulfilling his desires. Upon which his brother willingly entertained the proposal of serving him, and adorned his own daughter, and brought her to him by night, and put her into his bed. And Joseph, being disordered with drink, knew not who she was, and so lay with his brother's daughter, and this did he many times, and loved her exceedingly, and said to his brother that he loved this actress so well that he should run the hazard of his life if he must part with her. And yet probably the king would not give him leave to take her with him. But his brother bid him be in no concern about that matter, and told him he might enjoy her whom he loved without any danger, and might have her for his wife, and opened the truth of the matter to him, and assured him that he chose rather to have his own daughter abused than to overlook him, and see him come to public disgrace. So Joseph commended him for his brotherly love, and married his daughter, and by her begat a son, whose name was Hyrcanus, as we said before. And when this his youngest son showed, at 13 years old, a mind that was both courageous and wise, and was greatly envied by his brethren, as being of a genius much above them, and such a one as they might well envy, Joseph had once a mind to know which of his sons had the best disposition to virtue. And when he sent them severally to those that had then the best reputation for instructing youth, the rest of his children, by reason of their sloth and unwillingness to take pains, returned to him foolish and unlearned. After them he sent out the youngest, Hyrcanus, and gave him 300 yoke of oxen, and bid him go 2 days' journey into the wilderness, and sow the land there, and yet kept back privately the yokes of the oxen that coupled them together. When Hyrcanus came to the place and found he had no yokes with him, he contemned the drivers of the oxen, who advised him to send some to his father to bring them some yokes. But thinking that he ought not to lose his time while they should be sent to bring him the yokes, he invented a kind of stratagem, and what suited an age older than his own. For he slew 10 yoke of the oxen, and distributed their flesh among the laborers, and cut their hides into several pieces, and made him yokes, and yoked the oxen together with them, by which means he sowed as much land as his father had appointed him to sow, and returned to him. And when he was come back, his father was mightily pleased with his sagacity, and commended the sharpness of his understanding, and his boldness in what he did. And he still loved him the more, as if he were his only genuine son, while his brethren were much troubled at it.
Well, any comments on that paragraph?
Well, I'm not necessarily that, becoming any more impressed with Joseph's decisions, or the word is just totally escaping me, morals or whatever. The whole thing is just kind of a mess. I mean, his brother sends his daughter in to her uncle, knowing, on purpose.
And then when he finds out, he's glad about it, and he's like, "Oh man, you've given me such good brotherly love. You did such a great thing in doing that."
Yeah.
Really, really messed up. Obviously, drunkenness and polygamy and adultery and incest.
Some of the same stories you see in the Protestant canon. So.
Oh yeah, same sort of stuff. Just as bad.
Yeah, just as bad.
Just as bad. It's he definitely. It's not even in Josephus' telling of this. He isn't portrayed as someone necessarily seeking truth and righteousness. He's wise in worldly affairs, and even his son, who he counted his only genuine son, was his wisdom was, wisdom in worldly affairs, not necessarily in eternal matters. But it makes me wonder what Josephus, what his perspective was concerning some of this as well, because he was more along the rabbinic line of things, and apparently the later rabbis kind of praised a man taking his niece for a wife, which is contrary to the principles that are set forth in Scripture. A man and his aunt cannot be together. And same principle goes, a woman and her uncle cannot be together. It's the same principle of the law. So, kind of a odd situation.
And it sounded like his success kind of did something to his morals.
It could be that he, started out with good intentions and then ended up just basically becoming indulgent in all of his various desires.
Doesn't Proverbs say something about riches, kind of love of riches leads you astray?
Yes, it can certainly have a corrupting influence.
And it's hard to know exactly, how far different he became once he had the success.
Right.
In the beginning, all we're really told is that he was upset with Onias for not paying the taxes and being selfish and putting the people in danger. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he had high morals and, in any other areas of his life. He just knew, hey, this is our nation. That's not a smart thing to do, and you're putting everybody in danger.
Exactly.
So.
He had good sense that way.
Yeah.
He could have just been being opportunistic as well. He saw a situation in which he could be the ambassador, and he took advantage of that by becoming a tax collector so that he could become wealthy and powerful.
Yeah. Very true.
That certainly sounds like it's the case. Any other comments?
I wonder if he's going to tell any more about him.
I guess we'll see. Shall we continue on then?
Paragraph 7. But when one told him that Ptolemy had a son just born, and that all the principal men of Syria and the other countries subject to him were to keep a festival on account of the child's birthday, and went away in haste with great retinues to Alexandria, he was himself indeed hindered from going by old age. But he made trial of his sons, whether any of them would be willing to go to the king. And when the elder sons excused themselves from going, and said they were not courtiers good enough, or should I be couriers, or courtiers good enough for such conversation, and advised him to send their brother Hyrcanus, he gladly hearkened to that advice, and called Hyrcanus and asked him whether he would go to the king, and whether it was agreeable to him to go or not. And upon his promise that he would go, and his saying that he should not want much money for his journey, because he would live moderately, and that 10,000 drachmas would be sufficient, he was pleased with his son's prudence. After a little while, the son advised his father not to send his presents to the king from thence, but to give him a letter to his steward at Alexandria, that he might furnish him with money for purchasing what should be most excellent and most precious. So he, thinking that the expense of 10 talents would be enough for presents to be made the king, and commending his son as giving him good advice, wrote to Arion, his steward, that managed all his money matters at Alexandria, which money was not less than 3,000 talents on his account. For Joseph sent the money he received in Syria to Alexandria. And when the day appointed for the payment of the taxes to the king came, he wrote to Arion to pay them. So when the son had asked his father for a letter to the steward, and had received it, he made haste to Alexandria. And when he was gone, his brethren wrote to all the king's friends that they should destroy him.
Awful.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds, there's more than one thing about this story that kind of does make you think about the other Joseph in Egypt, although this Joseph and that Joseph were very, very different in character. But you have just the whole thing of brothers wanting to kill another brother and being wise in business matters, but one was wise in righteous principles.
Absolutely. Any other comments?
They had to know about that other Joseph too, probably, didn't they?
Oh yeah, you'd think so.
Mhm.
All right, shall we continue on?
Paragraph 8. But when he was come to Alexandria, he delivered his letter to Arion, and asked him how many talents he would have, hoping he would ask for no more than 10 or a little more. He said he wanted 1,000 talents, at which the steward was angry, and rebuked him, as one that intended to live extravagantly. And he let him know how his father had gathered together his estate by painstaking and resisting his inclinations, and wished him to imitate the example of his father. He assured him withal that he would give him but 10 talents, and that for a present to the king also. The son was irritated at this, and threw Arion into prison. But when Arion's wife had informed Cleopatra of this, with her entreaty that she would rebuke the child for what he had done, for Arion was in great esteem with her, Cleopatra informed the king of it. And Ptolemy sent for Hyrcanus and told him that what he wondered, when he was sent to him by his father, that he had not yet come into his presence, but had laid the steward in prison. And he gave order, therefore, that he should come to him, and give him an account of the reason of what he had done. And they report that the answer he made to the king's messenger was this, that there was a law of his that forbade a child that was born to taste of the sacrifice, before he had been at the temple and sacrificed to God, according to which way of reasoning he did not himself come to him in expectation of the present he was to make to him, as to one who had been his father's benefactor, and that he had punished the slave for disobeying his commands, for that it mattered not whether a master was little or great, so that unless we punish such as these, thou thyself mayest also expect to be despised by thy subjects. End of quote. Upon hearing this, his answer, he fell a-laughing, and wondered at the great soul of the child.
Okay, so that's an interesting circumstance. I kind of want to go over that last part again to understand better what he's saying. Okay, so basically he throws Apion into prison, and
Yours says Apion?
Okay, wait.
Just wondered, because there's so many typos.
Arion, sorry.
Okay.
Arion. Yeah, Arion into prison, and obviously Arion was their slave, and it says, so he comes and he's giving the reason to Ptolemy why he hadn't come to him in person. So this is what he says. There was a law of his, so there was a law of his being of Hyrcanus, that forbade a child that was born to taste of the sacrifice before he had been at the temple and sacrificed to God. So basically the idea is that a child can't partake of the sacrifice until he's offered sacrifice at the temple, is, I suppose, the law. According to which way of reasoning, he did not himself come to him in expectation of the present he was to make to him, as to one who had been his father's benefactor, and that he had punished the slave for disobeying his commands. So, before we move on there, understanding just the first part, basically from what I understand, he's saying that he's not going to go directly to the king, just like a child can't taste of the sacrifice until he's offered. So he's basically saying, I wasn't going to come and see you in person until I had gotten the gift to you, kind of equating the gift with the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then he's explaining, and that he had punished the slave for disobeying his commands. for that it mattered not whether a master was little or great, so that unless we punish such as these, thou thyself mayest also expect to be despised by thy subjects. So basically, I'm taking it as he is counting himself as a master, whether little or great.
So he's the little one.
Yeah, he's the little one.
Kind of portraying himself that way.
Yeah, and he feels like he has to punish the slave.
It seems as though he's saying, he's trying to get the king to identify with him, because he says, unless we punish such as those, thou thyself mayest also expect to be despised by thy subjects. So, surely you understand, that unless we punish people that are disobedient or, whatever in these matters, that your subjects won't respect you. Right?
Yeah, that seems to be what he's saying. How awful.
And the king was amazed at his reasoning, It seemed to have maybe gotten him.
Yeah, he got a good laugh out of it, apparently. Yeah, this reminds me of the sort of things that, like how I was mentioning the other night, kind of ancient Greco-Roman slavery and how it was really, really awful. This is kind of reminding me of some of that same spirit that you can read in some of the Greek and Roman writings concerning slaves, and, yeah, pretty awful.
So if Joseph was too old to go to the king himself, that king, that was the same king too, he must have been pretty old too.
You would think so, yeah, since he was a young man when this started.
Well, who knows what they considered to be old at that time. I know the Jews lived for a long time prior to that, but I think this might have been getting to the time period where their lifespan wasn't quite as long, but I'm not sure. At least in the telling of the time period that passed, it didn't seem to be so long that he would be in his 80s or anything.
Yeah, hard to say. It's mentioning him having 7 children by one wife and then another child.
It said 22 years later, something like that.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It did say.
20-some years later. So if he was in his 20s, maximum, let's say he's about 50.
Right.
And for some people, even today, 50, they've either inherited some really, poor genes or genetics or whatever and have health issues that prevents them from traveling far, or they've just abused themselves and they've aged poorly. 50 can be old, but...
Yeah, depending on where you're, what things were like, like you said, it may have been an era of low life expectancy.
It seems more so that way because, today, 70 doesn't even seem, it's older for sure, but it just doesn't seem like too old to travel.
Right.
But Moses didn't get going till 75.
There you go.
Right.
I'll be 75 in July.
All right.
And see, you're not old, so I don't know what's up with this guy.
No, the king probably took better care of himself too.
Could be. All right. Any other comments before we continue on? Okay. Shall we go on to the next paragraph then?
Paragraph 9. When Arion was apprised that this was the king's disposition, and that he had no way to help himself, he gave the child 1,000 talents, and was let out of prison. So after 3 days were over, Hyrcanus came and saluted the king and the queen. They saw him with pleasure, and feasted him in an obliging manner, out of the respect they bear to his father. So he came to the merchants privately, and bought 100 boys that had learning and were in the flower of their ages, each at a talent apiece. As also he bought 100 maidens, each at the same price as the other. And when he was invited to feast with the king among the principal men in the country, he sat down, the lowest of them all, because he was a little regarded, as a child in age still, and this by those who placed every one according to their dignity. Now when all those that sat with him had laid the bones of the several parts on a heap before Hyrcanus, parentheses, for they had themselves taken away the flesh belonging to them, till the table where he sat was filled full with them. Trypho, who was the king's jester, and was appointed for jokes and laughter at festivals, was now asked by the guests that sat at the table to expose him to laughter. So he stood by the king and said, Dost thou not see, my lord, the bones that lie by Hyrcanus? By this similitude thou mayest conjecture that his father made all Syria as bare as he hath made these bones. And the king, laughing at what Trypho said, and asking of Hyrcanus how he came to have so many bones before him, he replied, Very rightfully, my lord, for they are dogs that eat the flesh and the bones together, as these thy guests have done, looking in the meantime at those guests. For there is nothing before them, but they are men that eat the flesh and cast away the bones, as I, who am also a man, have now done. Upon which the king admired at his answer, which was so wisely made, and bid them all make an acclamation as a mark of their approbation of his jest, which was truly a facetious one. On the next day Hyrcanus went to every one of the king's friends and of the men powerful at court, and saluted them, but still inquired of the servants what present they would make the king on his son's birthday. And when some said that they would give 12 talents, and that others of greater dignity would every one give according to the quantity of their riches, he pretended to every one of them to be grieved that he was not able to bring so large a present, for that he had no more than 5 talents. And when the servants heard what he said, they told their masters, and they rejoiced in the prospect that Joseph would be disapproved, and would make the king angry by the smallness of his present. When the day came, the others, even those that brought the most, offered the king not above 20 talents, but Hyrcanus gave to every one of the 100 boys and 100 maidens that he had bought a talent apiece, for them to carry and introduce them, the boys to the kings and the maidens to Cleopatra, everybody wondering at the unexpected richness of the presents, even the king and queen themselves. He also presented those that attended about the king with gifts to the value of a great number of talents, that he might escape the danger he was in from them. For to these it was that Hyrcanus' brethren had written to destroy him. Now Ptolemy admired at the young man's magnanimity, and commanded him to ask what gifts he pleased. But he desired nothing else to be done for him by the king than to write to his father and brethren about him. So when the king had paid him very great respects, and had given him very large gifts, and had written to his father and his brethren, and all his commanders and officers about him, he sent him away. But when his brethren heard that Hyrcanus had received such favors from the king, and was returning home with great honor, they went out to meet him and to destroy him, and that with the privity of their father, for he was angry at him for the large sum of money that he had bestowed for presents, and so had no concern for his preservation. However, Joseph concealed the anger he had at his son out of fear of the king. And when Hyrcanus' brethren came to fight him, he slew many others of those that were with them, as also 2 of his brethren themselves, but the rest of them escaped to Jerusalem to their father. But when the Hyrcanus came to the city where nobody would receive him, he was afraid for himself and retired beyond the river Jordan, and there abode, but obliging the barbarians to pay their taxes.
This is quite the story.
Like a soap opera.
I suppose. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how he, in many ways, seems to be following in his father's footsteps. Maybe just a little bit more risky, though. Any comments?
Oh, I think it's so sad, it's so awful how Joseph, his father, is just fine if his other sons kill him because he used up too much money.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I wonder if he knew
Sad.
how that, by using that extra money, he had impressed the king.
Well, it seems to be, since the king had sent letters.
Yeah, totally,
right.
and that's why he wasn't overt. Joseph wasn't overt about his anger toward Joseph because he knew that, he feared the king. He knew the king liked his son, Hyrcanus, or whatever his name is.
Yeah, it's too bad that this is part of the history of the Jews.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
They're getting involved with another nation. They're trying to please the secular powers or make friends with them.
Mm.
What's sad about that he abode beyond the river Jordan, but obliging the barbarians to pay their taxes? Was he becoming a tax collector there?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too, if he's actually a tax collector or if he's just encouraging them to do it so that his father sees that he's, kind of wanting to cooperate and, he's not trying to start rebelling against his dad. He's trying to get them to pay their taxes because then it'll still go to his dad.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I'm really surprised at the next paragraph. I haven't read it all, but I couldn't help but skim a little bit. And I'm just like, what? But I'll wait till Tim reads it.
All right, well, you want to read it, Tim?
Paragraph 10. At this time, Seleucus, who was called Psoloter, reigned over Asia, being the son of Antiochus the Great. And now Hyrcanus' father, Joseph, died. He was a good man and of great magnanimity, and brought the Jews out of a state of poverty and meanness to one that was more splendid. He retained the farm of the taxes of Syria and Phoenicia and Samaria 22 years. His uncle also, Onias, died about this time and left the high priesthood to his son Simeon. And when he was dead, Onias, his son, succeeded him in that dignity. To him it was that Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, sent an embassage with an epistle, the copy whereof here follows. Arius.
Hey, I was just thinking before reading that, there's some interesting things in this paragraph, and the part that Teresa's shaking her head about is how Josephus here is referring to Joseph and how he is a good man. And it's like, wow, after all the things that we just read, and so this is, we were wondering a little bit about what the perspective of Josephus was concerning him, and that's it.
I just looked up the word magnanimity because I was like, well, I don't remember what that means. It's the fact or condition of being magnanimous, which is generosity.
Okay,
really?
So he's very generous, apparently. Yeah, so I guess the reason why Josephus thought he was a good man is because he brought the Jews out of a state of poverty to one that was more splendid. But, yeah, evidently there were some issues there. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is just kind of the timeline here. So you have Onias, he died, and I'm assuming that's in about 218 BC. And then his son, Simon, who I guess is Simon II, reigned after him, which was from 218 to 185. And then you have Onias the third.
His son.
Yeah, Onias, which is son of Simon again, so it's a generation after generation thing.
Simon, and then another Onias.
Yeah. So this next Onias is Onias the third, and he was in office from 185 to 175. So this is nearing about the time, just to kind of connect some other dots now, this is nearing about the time of the teacher of righteousness according to the Damascus document. It reaches kind of somewhere in about this time. And so, yeah, kind of interesting. Okay, so that's Onias III, and on the Wikipedia page for the list of high priests of Israel, it mentions that Onias III was in office from 185 to 175, and it says murdered 170 BC. So
just to clarify, it's to Onias, the high priest, Onias III, that the king Arius, the king of the Lacedaemonians, sent this letter that we're going to hear read?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this will be at some point, this letter was written at some point between 185 and 175 BC. So we're now into the beginning of the 2nd century and coming close to the time of the Maccabees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other comments on that paragraph before reading this letter?
It sounds like Hyrcanus took over the farming of the taxes when his father died.
I'm not sure if that's what it's saying or if it's just in recounting the reasons why Josephus is thinking that Joseph was a good guy. He's saying he retained the farm of the taxes of Syria and Phoenicia and Samaria 22 years.
Yeah, that's talking about Joseph, not Hyrcanus.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? All right. You want to read the letter then?
Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onias, sendeth greeting. Quote, we have met with a certain writing, whereby we have discovered that both the Jews and the Lacedaemonians are of one stock, and are derived from the kindred of Abraham. It is but just therefore that you, who are our brethren, should send to us about any of your concerns as you please. We will also do the same thing and esteem your concerns as our own, and will look upon our concerns as in common with yours. Demoteles, who brings you this letter, will bring your answer back to us. This letter is 4 square, and the seal is an eagle with a dragon in his claws. End of quote.
Interesting that it mentions that at the end.
I wanted to make sure that they knew whether or not it was tampered with, evidently.
I suppose so, yeah. Quite interesting. Yeah, Teresa was pointing out how it's similar to the letter from the Spartans to the Jews, pointing out, hey, we're both from the common stock of Abraham. So at that point when they mention derived from the kindred of Abraham, there's a footnote here, and I'll read that. It says, whence it comes that these Lacedaemonians declare themselves here to be of kin to the Jews, as derived from the same ancestor Abraham, I cannot tell, unless, as Grotius supposes, they were derived from the Doris. Oh, sorry. Oh, that's interesting. Mine says from the Doris.
Well, this is full of typos. So.
Yeah, they were derived from the Doris that came of the Pelasgi. These are, by Herodotus, called barbarians, and perhaps were derived from the Syrians and Arabians, the posterity of Abraham by Keturah. See Antiquities, Book 14, Chapter 10, Paragraph 22, and War, Book 1, Chapter 26, Paragraph 1, and Grot on 1 Maccabees 12:6.
That must be Grotius.
Yeah, that's Grotius we mentioned earlier. Okay. We may further observe from the recognitions of Clement that Eleazar of Damascus, the servant of Abraham, Genesis 15:2 and Genesis 24, was of old by some taken for his son, so that if the Lacedaemonians were sprung from him, they might think themselves to be the posterity of Abraham, as well as the Jews who were sprung from Isaac. And perhaps this Eleazar of Damascus is that very Damascus whom Trogus Pompeius, as abridged by Justin, makes the founder of the Jewish nation itself, though he afterwards blunders and makes Azalus, Doris, Abraham, and Israel kings of Judea and successors to this Damascus. It may not be improper to observe further that Moses Coronensis, in his history of the Athenians, informs us that the nation of the Parthians was also derived from Abraham by Keturah and her children.
You said in history of the Athenians? Mine has Armenians.
Yeah, this one is the history of the Athenians.
I guess they're the same group, maybe? Athenians happened?
I wouldn't think so. Yeah, I think it. Yeah, very interesting. All right, well, I guess that's a decent historical note. It'd be interesting to see all the different nations that came from Abraham. Interesting how there are a couple of records of letters being sent to the Jews by other nations who would typically be viewed as just heathen nations, who are writing to the Jews saying, hey, we found that we are also from Abraham and want to extend a friendly hand, basically.
And God told Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, right?
That is true. And it's also interesting that, this is far later from the time of Abraham, and these nations are looking back, and evidently Abraham was someone of note that they would know of. So it's not just someone exclusively in the history of the Jews. So that's quite interesting.
Well, he certainly must have made a name for himself, because capturing the captives back, or rescuing the captives back from those kings that...
the Battle of 5 Cities and all
that.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Among whatever other things, of course.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, some people today who are kind of opposed to any sort of quote-unquote biblical religion like to kind of portray Abraham and some of these other people as just some random wandering shepherds, wandering nomads in the ancient world who didn't really know anything that they're talking about and just making up all these stories. And it's like, no, you know what? If you go back into the ancient world, they were a lot more recognized than you'd expect for just some random wandering shepherds making up some stories by fireside. So any other comments?
They were remembered by many nations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it looks like we just have one more paragraph left in this chapter. So you want to go ahead and read that, Tim?
Paragraph 11. And these were the contents of the epistle which was sent from the king of the Lacedaemonians. But upon the death of Joseph, the people grew seditious on account of his sons. For whereas the elders made war against Hyrcanus, who was the youngest of Joseph's sons, the multitude was divided, but the greater part joined with the elders in this war, as did Simon the high priest, by reason he was of kin to them. However, Hyrcanus determined not to return to Jerusalem any more, but seated himself beyond Jordan, and was at perpetual war with the Arabians, and slew many of them, and took many of them captives. He also erected a strong castle, and built it entirely of white stone to the very roof, and had animals of prodigious magnitude engraven upon it. He also drew round it a great and deep canal of water. He also made caves of many furlongs in length, by hollowing a rock that was over against him. And then he made large rooms in it, some for feasting and some for sleeping and living in. He introduced also a vast quantity of waters which ran along it, and which were very delightful and ornamental in the court. But still he made the entrances at the mouth of the cave so narrow that no more than one person could enter by them at once. And the reason why he built them after that manner was a good one. It was for his own preservation, lest he should be besieged by his brethren, and run the hazard of being caught by them. Moreover, he built the courts of greater magnitude than ordinary, which he adorned with vastly large gardens. And when he had brought the place to this state, he named it Tyre. This place is between Arabia and Judea, beyond Jordan, not far from the country of Heshbon. And he ruled over those parts for 7 years, even all the time that Seleucus was king of Syria. But when he was dead, his brother Antiochus, was called Epiphanes, took the kingdom. Ptolemy also, the king of Egypt, died, who was besides called Epiphanes. He left 2 sons, and both young in age, the elder of which was called Philometor, and the youngest Physcon. As for Hyrcanus, when he saw that Antiochus had a great army, and feared lest he should be caught by him, and brought to punishment for what he had done to the Arabians, he ended his life, and slew himself with his own hand, while Antiochus seized upon all his substance.
Okay.
What a sad end.
Yeah. So this is interesting. It says when he ruled over, he ruled over those parts for 7 years, even all the time that Seleucus was king of Syria. That's talking about Hyrcanus, right?
That he ruled 7 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in that area that he ended up calling Tyre, that's between Arabia and Judea, beyond Jordan. That's all talking about Hyrcanus, right?
As far as I can tell.
So then when it says this, it says, but when he was dead, his brother Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes, took the kingdom.
Well, I wonder if it's Seleucus's king, or Seleucus' brother, Antiochus. So
okay, that could be. As in, okay, so, and he ruled over those parts for 7 years, even all the time that Seleucus was king of Syria. But when Seleucus was dead, his brother Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes, took the kingdom. That's what you're thinking, right?
Well, it wasn't quite it, but I think that's it now.
Yeah, because I was like, wait, is that saying that Antiochus Epiphanes was actually the brother of Hyrcanus, making him son of Joseph, who was nephew of Onias, the high priest, making Antiochus Jewish? I was like, what? But
I
no.
was thinking that it was still saying when Hyrcanus was dead, Seleucus's brother Antiochus took the kingdom. But I don't think that when you read it now the other way, I think that's it, because then further on it explains that Antiochus, Hyrcanus was still alive when Antiochus came to try to seize him, right? So it's
saying that whoever was dead, that person's brother Antiochus Epiphanes took the kingdom. And they're talking about Seleucus.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I knew that. I was like, okay, either there must be something wrong with the way things are formatted here on the version that we're reading from, or something wasn't right. But that makes sense. It's just worded a little subject to misinterpretation. But, okay, so that's interesting that it's actually, that Antiochus Epiphanes is actually he's actually the brother of Seleucus, king of Syria. So that's telling us a little bit of how Antiochus Epiphanes became involved in this. And the next chapter, I just want to read the heading to see what it's about. How upon the quarrels of the Jews one against another about the high priesthood, Antiochus made an expedition against Jerusalem, took the city, and pillaged the temple and distressed the Jews, as also how many of the Jews forsook the laws of their country, and how the Samaritans followed the customs of the Greeks and named their temple at Mount Gerizim, the temple of Jupiter Hellenius.
So that's what's coming up.
Yeah, that's what's coming up, and that's actually bringing it into the history that we read of in the books of the Maccabees, although it looks, just even from the title, as though it has additional information.
Very interesting.
Yeah, wow.
That's what the Maccabees were rebelling against, what they did, what Antiochus did to their temple and their country.
Yeah. Interesting. So, any other comments?
Now we know the story that led up to the Maccabees.
Now we know. It looks like things started off a little rocky right after the time of Nehemiah, and then they kind of seemed to improve a little bit, and then it just kind of got weird.
Yeah. Sad.
Weird and sad, that's for sure. All right. So we have been on for an hour and 40 minutes now, and we came to the end of this chapter. So we should kind of wrap things up here. Just wanted to give opportunity for anyone else if they have comments or questions or anything to say about what we've been reading before we bring it to a close.
We cannot serve two masters.
Amen to that. Okay. Looking like there's not many comments. I'm glad that in doing this we're getting to the point of the history of the Maccabees, and tomorrow night is the last meeting for Hanukkah. We'll be having the new moon meeting tomorrow during the day. Again, that's 12 noon Eastern time, and then tomorrow night we'll have the last Hanukkah meeting. So I'm glad that we're going to be getting into the time that's recorded in the Maccabees. But it's been good to be able to read that whole period, basically, between Nehemiah and the Maccabees. So
I look forward to reading all of what Josephus wrote.
Absolutely.
7 brothers, they served one master.
Yeah. So would anyone like to volunteer to pray? All right, I will. Heavenly Family, thank you so very much for preserving writings like this for 2,000 years. And also thank you through all the mess that your people have made time and time again, really for the whole history of the world. Thank you for bearing along with us.
Yes.
And thank you for preserving the truth throughout this whole time. Help us to learn from the mistakes of those who went before us and to follow all examples of righteousness. So thank you for everything, Heavenly Family. Please prepare our minds for the new moon meeting tomorrow. Show us exactly what we need to know for the sake of your kingdom, Heavenly Family. We ask these things in the name of Branch.
Amen.
Amen. Help us to serve you alone.
Amen.
Amen.